So I looked at this, the title for the panel, The Keys to Fighting and Winning a Cyber War, and tried to make sure that our different panel points are spread out over the subject matter a bit. So just to quickly reiterate, people are certainly the most important element of this. Trained and motivated people that are able to operate in cyberspace are our keys. But that said, we can have all these great people, we put them out there just like if we have well-motivated and trained soldiers. If we put them on weak defensive terrain, then we're not doing very well. They won't be very effective. So one of the keys is we really need to improve the defensibility of our networks and systems. And definition that I use for that, other people will talk about defensibility, but the one I particularly like comes from Richard Baitlick, an author and a security expert. And he defines 4 areas for that. One is systems, defensible systems are controlled access. You keep the bad guys out and you let only the good guys in. Pretty much makes sense. The next is defensible systems are minimized. Don't run stuff you don't need. Turn off protocols that you're not using. Turn off old systems. Don't expose more of an attack surface than you really need. You'd be amazed how many people don't even think about that. And there are old systems out there, and that system gets exploited, and that's the way into somebody's network. Defensible systems are monitored, and that's not just a high-priced intrusion detection system, but it's simple things like logging, inventory, knowing what you have, what software are we running, what systems are out there, what network segments do we have. Some organizations do not have a good picture of what's going on in their networks, what their networks include, and when an incident happens, there's really no way for them to come back and figure out what happened to them other than, well, I guess we'll clean up and we'll try to do better next time. And finally, defensible systems are kept current. So you have all this software, keep it patched. How many times does a system get owned simply because it wasn't patched for the latest vulnerability out there? So that's my key, my mnemonics for remembering defensible systems. And in cyberspace, the best defense is a good defense. In the kinetic realms, we talk about things like in air combat, air power, that sort of thing. Being offensive can be decisive. Probably the best way to achieve air supremacy is to destroy the other guy's air force on the ground. We don't have that option generally in cyberspace operations. Who is the enemy? Where is the enemy's air force, so to speak? We don't know. It's just a lot of systems, networks, and computers out there. So it resembles maybe more of counterinsurgency operations rather than high-intensity conflict, and we have to adapt to that. And so this defensibility also helps us to reduce our adversaries' cyber combat power, because most of that power is derived from vulnerabilities that exist in our systems. If I leave gaping holes in my network, somebody can use those. If I close the gaping holes, that attack tool is no longer useful. It's almost like if your enemy had an anti-aircraft missile that homed in on the running lights on an aircraft. Okay, turn off the running lights, and now that whole weapon system is completely useless. And we in cyberspace need to improve defensibility to shut off a lot of that cyber power and take it away from our adversaries. It won't be 100% effective, but it can certainly make a big difference. DoD's made a lot of progress in trying to improve defensibility. I've seen that over the years. I've gone from being terribly embarrassed about where we were on a lot of things to at least we're moving in the right direction. And it's relatively easy, or at least straightforward, for DoD and the rest of the federal government to say, here's what we need to do for defensible systems, and we'll go out and procure that. And we don't need to worry about things like profitability, return on investment. If we can get the appropriations for it and we think it's an appropriate expenditure, we do that. But it is an expensive thing, and so for our nation as a whole, what about all of the privately owned networks? We had the question about network service providers. How about for Fortune 500 companies, for utility providers, for defense contractors? What's their responsibility? How do we get a company to take appropriate actions for defensibility when there may not be a real good business case for that? I don't have the answer for that. Things that have been kicked around, regulation, incentives as far as things like tax credits, that sort of thing. I don't know, could you do some kind of coercion, like wait till the first company gets actually driven out of business by a cyber attack? And there have been obviously some small incidents by that, but if a large Fortune 500 company suddenly had to fold because of that, that may provide an incentive for others to improve their defensibility. And some places that we probably need to really look at with that, the places that make me concerned: critical infrastructure, utilities. That's one of the big topics. What if somebody was able to shut off the electrical grid of the United States? And what's the excuse for not having a defensible infrastructure for that? Similarly, other public safety related issues, service providers. The defense industrial base is another one. So clear defense contractors. I think the federal government has some leverage to say you will do this if you want to have a contract. And obviously it's an expense, but it's the kind of thing where, for the most part, the defense industrial base and the contractors are working with DoD to improve this, and we do need to get better. And in a more general picture, looking at the overall power of the nation, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, we need to look at things like financial systems, logistic networks, and that sort of thing, and make sure that we're providing appropriate defense. So another key is to define the roles and authorities for cyberspace operations and establish appropriate command and control structures for that. Cyberspace raises new questions about the roles of the military, law enforcement, and other government agencies in protecting the United States. So we really need to figure out what constitutes armed conflict versus criminal behavior versus maybe just annoying activity that maybe you would respond to with a civil action rather than a criminal or military armed force. And we need to answer the question of what do we want DoD to be able to do in defense of the United States in cyberspace. Defending the national airspace, the Air Force monitors the airspace, isn't as prepared to go up and send out scramble fighters to go look at a problem, if necessary, to attack a target. We don't have that same relationship in those authorities defined in cyberspace yet, and we need to answer that question and figure out who's authorized to do that. For this command and control, networks make us tend to want to centralize everything, but we should really power down defense policies as much as possible to local service providers with advice and assistance, and try to make sure that centralized decisions do as little as possible. For operations beyond the network perimeter, then that requires more centralized coordination. But for local providers, they should really be able to handle their own networks as best works for them within common sense. And finally, we really need to figure all this stuff out ahead of time. Responding effectively to an incident does not leave a lot of time for debating policy, formulating legal opinions, and that sort of thing. We're talking about flash to bang time in milliseconds and the time for an attack to develop and be over in seconds or minutes. So we can't sit there and try to figure out what's going on. The thing that bothers me a lot of times, and just maybe as a takeaway on this, what happens if a major incident happens tomorrow night? Are we ready to go?